A single desperate gunner, sealed in the most fatal position on a bomber, made a choice that broke every rule. It was a decision forged not in a command center, but in the frozen, oxygen-thin hell of 23,000 feet, and in for violent, earth-shattering minutes. His defiance didn't just send a dozen enemy fighters spiraling from the sky. It tore up the entire book of aerial combat and forced the world to write a new one. This is not just a story of survival against impossible odds. This is the story of a mind that looked at a guaranteed death sentence and saw a fatal flaw in the logic. A mind that understood that in the calculus of war, sometimes the most suicidal option is the only one that keeps you alive. February 1944. The air over Europe was a graveyard of aluminum and ambition. The Allied bomber offensive, a brutal hammer aimed at the heart of German industry, was bleeding. Losses were catastrophic, a grim tax paid in young men and flying fortresses. In this cauldron, a B-17 named Hell's Fury carved its trembling path deep into enemy territory. The drone of Cyclone engines was a monotonous prayer. Inside the aircraft's icy, thin-skinned belly, 10 men lived in a bubble of roaring noise and palpable dread. And in the very back, in the most isolated, most vulnerable position of all, was Staff Sergeant Michael "Mad Mike" Donovan. Cramped into a plexiglass and steel cocoon, swaddled in electrically heated layers, he was the bomber's eyes and sting. On this day, through his gyroscopic sight, he watched a spectacle of organized death. 12 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, sleek and predatory, were sliding into formation. They gathered like wolves circling a wounded stag, preparing for the classic von Stieg attack, climbing from behind and below to rake the bomber's vulnerable belly. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine. Standard American response: button up, hold fire until they're committed, make every bullet count. Every line in the gunnery manual, every word from his instructors, every shred of common sense screamed one thing: wait, conserve, react. Donovan's fingers tightened on the twin triggers of his .50 caliber machine guns. His mind played a different tape. It replayed South Boston alleys, where waiting for the first punch meant you ate the last 3. It replayed the disdainful looks of flight school instructors who called him unpredictable. He saw not 12 invincible fighters, but 12 individual pilots. Men who, for all their training, still flinched at unexpected traces. Protocol demanded caution. Training preached conservation. His own pounding heart begged for cover. Michael Donovan chose, instead, to attack. What happened in the next 140 seconds would shatter doctrine, rewrite tactical manuals, and send shockwaves through both the 8th Air Force and the Luftwaffe High Command. To understand that choice, you have to go back to the docks of South Boston in the 1930s. This wasn't a picturesque upbringing, it was a daily seminar in applied violence. Michael Donovan learned physics not in a classroom, but in the transfer of kinetic energy from a fist to a jaw. Economics was the cost of a misplaced trust. Psychology was the visible flicker of fear in an opponent's eyes before they moved. His father, a grizzled longshoreman, had one piece of philosophy: the world hits first, Mikey. Your only job is to hit back faster and harder. His older brother, a Golden Gloves contender, taught him that footwork wasn't for running away, but for cutting off the ring, for controlling the space where the fight happens. Young Mike lost his share of scrapes, but only, he noted, the ones where he hesitated. When the news from Pearl Harbor crackled over the radio, it wasn't patriotism that drove Donovan, it was the recognition of the ultimate, sanctioned fight. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces the next day. They saw his build, his rough hands, and tried to slot him into the ground crew. He refused. He wanted the guns. He badgered his way into aerial gunnery school, where his natural aptitude was immediately overshadowed by his problematic attitude. Instructors drilled defensive patterns: track, lead, fire short bursts, conserve ammo. Donovan's practice sessions were furious, aggressive. He would acquire targets that weren't yet threats, firing imaginary bursts at planes still miles out. An exasperated instructor pulled him aside. "Donovan, you're exposing an imaginary turret to imaginary return fire. You're too aggressive. You'll get yourself killed." Donovan's reply, later embellished into legend by his classmates, was pure, unvarnished street logic. "A dead gunner can't fire back, Sarge. I aim to stay living. He graduated near the top of his class, not for his tight grouping on the target sleeve, but for his blistering, instinctive speed. His secret was simple, and it violated every teaching. He didn't wait for the target to enter his zone. He projected his zone outward, hunting the enemy before they even knew they were being hunted. His first operational posting was to the 390th Bombardment Group, stationed at the fog-shrouded airfield in Framingham, England. The aircraft assigned to him was a battle-weary B-17F named Hell's Fury. The name was earned. In its 3 previous missions, it had been mauled by flak and chewed by fighters, returning each time with wounded men and perforated skin. The previous tail gunner, a Sergeant Eddie Morrison, had survived his last mission with a shard of cannon shell in his leg. Upon landing, he didn't just request a transfer, he reportedly told the crew chief, "That tail position is cursed. The next man who takes it dies there." The story circulated quickly, a ghost story to chill the bones of even veteran airmen. Donovan heard the tale and immediately volunteered for the spot. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, a stern Missourian with a dozen missions under his belt, interviewed him personally. In the quiet of a Nissen hut, Whitmore laid it out. "You know the numbers, Sergeant? The statistical life expectancy of a tail gunner on AB-17 completing a 25-mission tour is less than a coin flip. 38% don't make it. It's the coldest, loneliest, and most targeted spot on the plane." Donovan didn't blink. "Then I've got a 62% chance, Captain. I like those odds." "Why?" Whitmore pressed, studying the intense young man before him. "Because," Donovan said, his voice flat, "I don't plan on letting them shoot at me. I'll be shooting at them first. They'll be reacting to me." Whitmore stared for a long moment, then a faint, grim smile touched his lips. "You're insane, Donovan. You'll fit right in." His first missions were a trial by fire and a validation of his theory. On a raid to a ball-bearing plant in Schweinfurt, while other gunners held their fire, Donovan unleashed a long, ranging burst at a swarm of 109s still forming up a mile away. He didn't hit anything, but the lead fighter jinked violently, scattering the neat attack formation. The assault faltered before it began. He shot down one fighter that day, damage to others, but the crew talked more about the audacity of that first, wasted burst than the kills. On his second mission, he experimented further. As to 109s dove in from the stern, he ignored the lead aircraft, the expected threat. Instead, he laid his traces on the wingman, the one focused on holding formation, the one whose pilot felt safest. The explosive disintegration of his partner's aircraft so shocked the leader that he broke off his attack entirely. The math for Donovan was irrefutable. Back on the ground, Crew Chief Frank Murphy confronted him with the empty ammunition boxes. "You fired 1,600 rounds, Donovan. Standard load is 2,000. You used 80% of your ammo on one mission. You'll be a sitting duck on the way home." Donovan, wiping gun oil from his hands, replied with the calm of an accountant, "And how many hits did we take, Chief?" "0. I'll trade ammo for an intact aircraft and 10 living crewmen every single time." But Donovan was frustrated. He was still reacting, just reacting earlier and more aggressively. He spent his off hours not in the local pub, but in the intelligence hut, studying captured Luftwaffe manuals and after-action reports. He pestered pilots of the P-51 escort groups about fighter tactics. He identified the core, unspoken assumption of American bomber defense. It was a reactive doctrine. It assumed the German fighter pilot held the initiative. He chose the time, the angle, the method of attack. The gunner's job was to respond, to mitigate, to endure. Donovan asked a radical question. What if you could steal that initiative? What if you could force the hunter to constantly dodge, to flinch, to defend? Before he ever lined up his killing shot, the idea consumed him. It was a psychological gambit, a street fighter's feint applied to the vast canvas of the sky. The stage for the ultimate test was set for March 6, 1944. The target, the Messerschmitt aircraft factory in Augsburg, a heavily defended prize deep in southern Germany. The mission briefing was grim. Intelligence predicted over 150 German fighters would be scrambled. The route was nicknamed the Corridor of Corpses. Captain Whitmore gathered his crew in the pre-dawn darkness. This one will be rough. Gentlemen, expect heavy opposition from the moment we cross the coast. Stay sharp, stay disciplined, stay alive." It was then that Donovan, breaking protocol, spoke up, "Captain, permission to try something different today." All eyes turned to him. "Different how, Sergeant?" "Aggressive fire. I want to engage fighters during their form-up phase. Not when they're diving at us, but when they're still getting organized, miles out. I want to force them to defend before they can even think about attacking." The bombardier snorted. "You'll burn all your ammo before we reach the IP. Maybe," Donovan countered, his gaze locked on Whitmore, "or maybe I prevent the real fight. Sir, we've been playing strict defense for 2 years. How's that working for us? A 38% tail gunner casualty rate. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot." The cockpit was silent, the weight of the coming mission pressing down. Whitmore, after an eternity of 5 seconds, gave a single, sharp nod. "You've got this one mission to prove it, Donovan. If we get shredded because you're empty when we need you, you're off the guns for good." "Understood." "Understood, sir." Hell's Fury lifted off into a bleak English morning at 6:47 hours. The formation climbed through soup-grey cloud, a vast armada of death laden with bombs. The intercom was quiet, each man locked in his own private world of fear and focus. They crossed the channel, the sea a dull sheet of lead below. Then came the coast of occupied Europe, the enemy coast, as the briefing officers called it with melodramatic gravity, and with it, the first, sporadic flak bursts, black smudges against the sky that rattled the airframe. Then, at 0919 hours, the call they all dreaded crackled over the radio. "Fighters! 6 o'clock high! Many bandits!" Donovan swiveled his turret. There they were, not a scattered few, but a full swarm of 12 BF-109s, a neat, deadly arrowhead to 1,000 yards back, positioning for their killing dive. Standard response: "Wait, let them commit. Let them fall into the kill zone." Donovan took a breath, exhaled a cloud of frozen vapor, and squeezed the triggers. At 2,000 yards, his tracers were less bullets and more fiery warnings. They asked across the sky in red and orange streaks, most falling short by hundreds of feet. But the effect on the German formation was immediate. The neat arrowhead shattered into confusion, wingmen braking instinctively. Their rhythm ruined before the attack truly began. Captain Whitmore snapped over the intercom for Donovan to stop wasting ammunition, but Donovan calmly told him to watch. The Germans regrouped, yet their approach was different now, hesitant, cautious, like men testing an electric wire. Donovan had shifted the initiative, forcing them to think, and a thinking fighter pilot is slower and more vulnerable. He led them close to 1,500 yards and fired another short burst, watching the formation waver again. One pilot, clearly a veteran unwilling to be intimidated, pressed forward alone, cutting through the uncertainty with predatory focus. Donovan let him come, counting down the distance as the fighter grew clearer in his sight. At 1,000 yards, instead of tapping the trigger, he held it down. A torrent of armor-piercing and incendiary rounds filled the sky, an inescapable funnel of death. The Messerschmitt flew straight into it, transforming from sleek machine to a blossoming fireball that spiraled down, carving smoke across the heavens. A cheer rang out, but Donovan was already searching for the next threat. The remaining fighters regrouped quickly and tried a split attack, adding pressure from the 7 o'clock position. Donovan made his choice instantly, ordering the waist gunners to cover the flank while he held 6 o'clock alone. He locked on to the lead attacker and fired, watching it disintegrate. He shifted, fired again, and another fighter erupted into flame. A third lost a wing and cartwheeled away. In under 30 seconds, 6 attackers became 3, and the survivors fled. The first engagement ended as abruptly as it began. Donovan checked his ammunition. He had already burned through 1,200 rounds, leaving 800 remaining, and the mission had barely begun. The German response was swift and furious. 15 minutes later, a full group of 18 fighters appeared, attacking not in neat formation but in a chaotic, all-angle swarm high, low, and straight up the tail. Instead of dividing his attention, Donovan doubled down on focus. He ordered the other gunners to cover the flanks and welded his sights on the stern-on attackers. The closing speed was brutal, giving him only seconds. He opened fire early, walking his tracers into the path of the lead aircraft. The German pilot held course until Donovan's rounds erased the cockpit in a spray of glass and blood. The fighter behind flew straight into the debris and a continuing storm of fire. The kills followed almost instantly. The remaining attackers broke hard, tearing away in panic, their coordinated assault shattered by one unyielding point of resistance. Donovan's guns fell silent moments later. He was nearly out, only 400 rounds left, and the mission was only halfway complete. The target still lay ahead, followed by the long, exposed flight home. The Germans knew. They regrouped at a distance, 27 fighters forming a patient, deadly line. They set up from the perfect angle, directly behind the tail, where Donovan now sat with empty guns. Inside his clear turret, he watched sunlight flash on enemy canopies, fully aware he had nothing left to fire. But he still had one weapon. As the lead fighter steadied for its killing run, Donovan traversed his turret slowly and deliberately. He centered his empty barrels on the cockpit and tracked the pilot with absolute precision. The German saw it, the same guns that had obliterated half his comrades. Locked unblinking on his face, survival instinct overrode logic. He broke hard, and the formation behind him followed. The attack collapsed, undone by the fear Donovan had already planted. Hell's Fury flew on to its target and returned to England battered but alive. During debrief, ground crews counted more than 50 holes in the bomber and every single one of Donovan's 2,000 rounds expended. Confirmations poured in from other crews, escorts, and intercepted German transmissions. The final count stunned everyone. 12 confirmed kills for probables and 3 damaged in just the minutes of combat. Whitmore looked at Donovan's steady hands and asked only one question: how? The story exploded through the 8th Air Force. Days later, a major general arrived and summoned Donovan. He asked if this could be taught, not to everyone, but to the right men. Donovan hesitated, wanting only to return to his crew until the general forced the issue. Other crews were dying because they didn't know what he knew. Which mattered more, 9 men or thousands? Donovan was reassigned that afternoon. What he created went beyond gunnery technique. It was a complete psychological shift. The Donovan Doctrine rested on 5 principles: seize the initiative by attacking the enemy's plan, use the first burst as a psychological message, concentrate violence on the most dangerous threat rather than spreading fire, treat ammunition as an investment in survival, and accept personal risk to reduce collective loss. Traditionalists resisted, calling it reckless and wasteful, but results crushed opposition. Within 3 months, tail gunner casualty rates dropped sharply, and German attack success plummeted. Post-war analysis would estimate that Donovan's methods saved more than 300 bombers and 3,000 airmen. Even Luftwaffe reports began warning pilots to avoid bombers that fired early and aggressively from the tail. After the war, Michael Donovan returned quietly to South Boston, worked construction, and rarely spoke of combat. There were no parades, little recognition, and when he died in 1998, his obituary was short. Yet his legacy endures. He proved that true defense is not a shield, but a spear thrown first, and that survival belongs not to those who hide from danger, but to those who make the enemy dread the act of attacking itself. This is one thread in the vast tapestry of human courage. We remember it so that such courage becomes a permanent part of our collective memory.